Hello. So I'm feeling guided to share a little bit of fierce love today by sharing the experience that I had earlier. And so I basically received a message today through social media, and it's something that triggered me. And at first, I didn't know how to respond. And after receiving some feedback, because I'm doing this whole like internal thing right now of really just aligning all of the out of alignment parts within myself. So I was asking for feedback. And after receiving some feedback, I realized, this is my work. This other person had triggered me, right, with this message, but they weren't doing it on purpose. This is my work. This is my work. And I realized that this is my work today. And there's a lot of different nuances and a lot of different caveats, but I want to keep it pretty focused. So I realized this was my work. And I didn't want to do the work. I was pretty resistant, but I called a friend and they helped me through it. And after I got through it, and I was in a much clearer space, it was funny because the work itself was actually a soul retrieval, and it was a piece that was wanting to come in that's so perfect for this transmission, because it was the part of me, it was the little inner child part of me that knew that it wasn't her responsibility, aka my responsibility, to take on the responsibilities of others. And so she left because as a child, I was inundated by so many frequencies and energies from mostly my mom and all of the people that were around me that were basically unloading all of their trauma onto me. People can take this as criticism and judgment. It's not. It's actually to gain awareness. This is what we do unconsciously. We project certain conditions onto each other without even realizing it. But as a kid, I felt it. And I also felt like a failure because I couldn't reconcile my mom's trauma within myself. How fucked up is that? That was never my responsibility. So we cleared it. Cleared that shit. And after that, I realized, oh, okay, this is my work. That person triggered me, right? But it wasn't that person. Like, here's the thing. When someone triggers us, the conditioning usually is to retort, to respond, or to react. Oh, you don't know me. Fuck you. Whatever the response is. And I've definitely reacted like that. That's why I'm doing all of this work, because I realize all of that shit is not me. So when we do that, we're actually just going back and projecting the same wounded energy. But when we realize, this is my work. This is my work. There's something within me. When we realize we're triggered, it's actually activating a piece within you that's fragmented, that's in pain, that may be feeling unworthy, that may be feeling undeserving, etc., that's wounded in some way and is triggering that emotional response in you so that you can become aware of it. This is very powerful alchemization work. It doesn't feel good most of the time. A lot of times it can be really ugly. But going back into that cave is how we process the trauma. That's how we get back those pieces of ourselves that were left behind. They're not really left behind. They're still there. They're still a part of you. They're just in your unconscious. They're in your subconscious or superconscious, however you want to say it. They're in the unconscious realm. So it's up to us, being conscious, We got to go down there and get those pieces consciously. Many of us don't truly know who we are. And if you're like me, I never really grew up knowing who I was because I wasn't really allowed to be myself or have any kind of sense of autonomy or any boundaries. So I was this empath who was wide open, had no boundaries, and let everyone and everything unload their trauma onto her, onto that little kid. This is what we do as a society. And this is why I'm here, to help illuminate this. Now that I've come a whole fucking cycle, it took me fucking almost 40 years, the year of my 40th birthday, to really become clear. And it wasn't because I was just like going along. It was because I chose to put in all of the work relentlessly to work on myself, to find myself, to rediscover myself, because it was basically shitted on as a kid. And I was carrying all of that shit and it dimmed my light. I lost who I was. I lost myself. But no more. I see myself. That's why this work is so important. That's why it's important, even more important, to recognize when it's your work. If you're triggered as fuck, and especially if it's an emotional trigger that you cannot control, it's uncontrollable. I've had those too, where I go into fits of rage and I start like hitting people or hitting things. I've been there. When it's triggers like that, or even just triggers that piss you off or that make you sad, or you're just like, I don't know, I'm responding this way. There is a piece of you there that wants to be conscious, that wants your love, your acceptance, your forgiveness, that wants you, your attention, that wants you to see who you really are at the core of you. The conditioning is not you. The trigger is not you. What's underneath is, though. And so the conditioning, the retorting, the responding out of hurt, out of anger, that's what we're conditioned to do, because that keeps the perpetual motion of these wounds going. It stops with me. It stops with me. I recognize those patterns when they come to me. And I'm learning to recognize them even more and more and more, because for years, for those 3 years, trust me, I was still going into those negative spirals. But it wasn't until this like past 3-4 months that I'm like, whoa, I'm really gaining footing. And I'm really starting to see my responsibility in all of it. And my responsibility wasn't to retort to that person, to react to that person, and to get into it, and to tell them how it is. My responsibility was to me, to clear that from me, because that's how we heal as a humanity. It stops with me. And the more of us that stand up and claim that it stops with me, we hold very powerful keys to help alchemize this for humanity. However, it's up to each individual to make the choice for themselves whether or not they wish to do this work, because it is in your choice. It is in your divine will. You can choose to do it and you can choose to not to do it. But sometimes we don't even know that we can do it. Sometimes we don't even know it's a choice. So here I am, giving you that choice, reminding you that you have a choice. You don't have to react to somebody else, because that is what the programming and the conditioning wants. There's a whole fucking system and a whole false matrix built up around us, right before our eyes, that plug into these perpetual motion, that want us to like react and keep that trauma energy in motion. It stops with me. It stops with me. And so I'm here as a powerful reminder to you that it is not your fault that you were given these programs. Although your inner child may feel that it was your fault, it's not your fault. This is part of us deconstructing the false fucking matrix grid. This is how we become aware of it. It stops with me. It stops when you decide that it stops with you. It's not your fault that the false belief templates were given to you, that the conditioning, that the trauma happened to you, that you experienced these wounds. It's not your fault. However, it is your responsibility to alchemize it. And I'm here as a powerful reminder of your responsibility to that. It's your responsibility. It's not others' responsibility. And it's not up to you to project that responsibility onto others. Although we do that pretty unconsciously, pretty regularly. And I'm here shedding light on this as a humble, loving servant of the Sophia, Christos, reminding you of your divinity, reminding you that you are Christ, you are Sophia. It lies within you. When Jesus said, "Be like me," he was alluding to the fact that we all have within us all of the keys already to become like Christ. And doing our work is the internal alchemization process that alchemizes carbon-based DNA into silicon, crystalline-based DNA. This is how we become Christ. This is the second coming of Christ. We are all the second coming of Christ. That which was alluded to in the Bible. That's why it is important to do your work. When you do your work, you become like Christ. You Christ yourself. You initiate yourself into Christhood. That's what you're beginning to do. And in this ascension process, it's great to be aware of all of these great uplifting concepts. But if we're not doing our work and we're spiritually bypassing all of the wounds and the trauma, we're doing ourselves a great disservice. And we might be building a Merkaba, but we are not going to be able to power it, because the power comes from knowing all of yourself, from recollecting all of the parts of yourself. It is your responsibility to do that. So just wanted to share some tough love with you. Let it sink in. And if you're triggered by this, good. Let it trigger you into the remembrance of who you actually motherfucking are, because you're powerful. You're more powerful than the systems that were built to enslave you and shackle you and deny you of your divinity, of your Christhood. If you're triggered by this, good. Let it trigger you into the remembrance. Let it trigger you into the remembrance of who you actually are. Underneath all of the wounds that you may be carrying, underneath all of the conditioning and all of the programming that you're still carrying, let it trigger you. Let it remind you, I'm here as a catalyst, and I'm here to take responsibility for myself so that I may be in my Christhood, in my divinity, so I can trigger you into remembering yours. May this serve in the highest and best way to remind you of your divinity and remind you of how important the internal work, the shadow work, the self-reflection work, the process work of your wounds or of any beliefs that you might be holding that are not yours, that are out of alignment. I'm here to trigger you, to catalyze you to release all of that shit. I'm here serving my purpose to help catalyze you and trigger you into yours. I recognize your divinity. I see you in your divinity. I know who you are. I know what you are. And I know how you serve. It's time that you remember that as well. The highest blessings to you.